The Great Stork Derby is one of the most unusual inheritance stories in history. What began as a simple will quickly turned into a situation no one expected, drawing attention, controversy, and consequences that would affect countless lives. In this video, we explore the lesser-known details behind the Great Stork Derby, revealing how one decision after death set off events that still raise questions today. The room was already full when the lawyer arrived. Not full of conversation, not full of noise, full of expectation. Men in dark coats sat shoulder to shoulder on wooden benches. Women leaned forward, hands folded tightly in their laps. Reporters stood along the walls, notebooks ready, eyes alert. Everyone in the room believed they knew why they were there. A wealthy Toronto lawyer had died. A will was about to be read. Money was about to change hands. That was how these things usually went. But this time was different, because the man whose will lay folded on the table in front of them was not known for simplicity. His name was Charles Vance Miller, and those who knew him, really knew him, understood that nothing he did was accidental. The lawyer cleared his throat. The sound echoed more than it should have. He unfolded the document carefully, as if aware that once the words were spoken aloud, they could not be taken back. The first clauses caused little reaction. Small bequests, odd ones perhaps, but nothing alarming. A few raised eyebrows, a few quiet chuckles. Someone near the back shifted in their seat. Then the lawyer stopped reading, not because he had finished, because he had reached something that demanded attention. He paused, long enough for the room to notice, long enough for the reporters to glance up, long enough for the silence to thicken. Then he began again, slowly, deliberately. He read a clause that did not mention relatives, did not mention charities, did not mention institutions. Instead, it described a condition, a future condition, one that would not be resolved today or tomorrow or even next year. It would take 10 years, and it would involve children, not metaphorical ones, real children, born to real women in the city of Toronto. The lawyer continued reading. Each word landed heavier than the last. By the time he finished the sentence, the room was no longer silent. There was confusion, disbelief, a few nervous laughs that stopped almost immediately, because no one could quite decide whether what they had just heard was a joke or something far more serious. The clause stated that the bulk of Charles Vance Miller's estate would go to the mother who, in the 10 years following his death, gave birth to the greatest number of children in Toronto. If there was a tie, the money would be divided. That was it. No moral explanation, no additional guidance, no limits, just a condition. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the questions began. Was this legal? Could it be challenged? Surely it would be overturned. But beneath the legal confusion, another thought was forming, quietly, dangerously. Because outside that room, Toronto was not thriving. Work was becoming uncertain, rent was rising, families were struggling to survive. And the sum of money described in that will, though not yet fully calculated, was enormous, life-changing, generation-defining. The room slowly emptied. People stepped out into the street, still talking, still arguing, still shaking their heads. But in kitchens and boarding houses and cramped apartments across the city, the conversation had already begun. Not about legality, not about ethics, but about possibility and whether anyone would actually try. Charles Vance Miller was dead, but the experiment he designed had just begun, and over the next 10 years, it would test the limits of law, morality, desperation, and endurance, all through the most intimate act of human life: birth. To understand the will, you must first step into the world that shaped the man who wrote it. Toronto in the late 19th century was a city in transition. Horse-drawn carriages still ruled many streets, their wheels cutting deep lines into packed dirt. Gas lamps glowed softly at night. Factories rose alongside churches, and smoke drifted above rooftops as industry tightened its grip on daily life. It was a city built on order, hierarchy, and moral certainty. Into this world, Charles Vance Miller was born in 1853 in the small town of Aylmer, Ontario, a place where reputation mattered, discipline was expected, and deviation rarely went unnoticed. From an early age, Miller stood out, not because he was loud, not because he sought attention, but because he observed. At the University of Toronto, Miller's academic record was extraordinary. Professors remembered him as focused, controlled, and relentlessly precise. He did not merely learn the law, he studied how it functioned when people believed it would protect them. When he entered legal practice in Toronto, the city was growing fast. New immigrants arrived daily. Tenement housing spread. Work was plentiful, but stability was fragile. Miller thrived in this environment. He invested carefully. He bought land before others saw its value. He entered shipping, rail transport, real estate, and horse racing, industries driven not by sentiment, but by calculation. Yet, despite his growing wealth, Miller avoided excess. He did not build a grand estate. He did not host lavish gatherings. He lived alone, often repairing his own properties in the evenings, sleeves rolled up, hands dirty with work. To neighbors, he was quiet. To colleagues, he was sharp. To friends, he was difficult to read. He disliked organizations that relied on shared belief, churches, political movements, charitable societies, not because he rejected morality, but because he distrusted performance. Toronto's society at the time valued outward respectability above all else. Marriage was expected. Large families were praised publicly, even when privately resented. Poverty was often framed as moral failure. Miller saw through this. He watched how people behaved when no one was applauding. His habit of dropping dollar bills on sidewalks was not done in secret alleys. It was done in public spaces, busy streets, near storefronts, outside offices. He observed hesitation, quick glances, hands closing over money with embarrassed urgency. Later, he would say that a single dollar revealed more about character than hours of conversation. And as Toronto entered the early 20th century, those observations hardened into belief. Miller believed money stripped away social theater, that when incentives were clear, people would reveal priorities they did not openly admit. In 1921, with the city growing louder, faster, and more unequal, Miller drafted his will. He did so carefully, methodically, each clause written not for effect, but for durability. His lawyers warned him. They spoke of public reaction, of scandal, of court challenges. But Miller had spent his life studying exactly that response. He was not interested in approval. He was interested in outcomes. When he died suddenly on October 31, 1926, in his law office near Yonge Street, Toronto, Toronto was already under strain. Employment was tightening, housing was overcrowded, families lived close to the edge. And the man who had spent decades watching others respond to temptation had left behind a single condition that would force the entire city to respond at once. Not in theory, but in action. The will was not read in a dramatic hall. There were no grand gestures, just a legal office, a small crowd, and a document that would soon be discussed across the entire country. Charles Vance Miller's lawyers had seen unusual wills before, but none like this. The document itself was ordinary in appearance: typed pages, careful margins, formal language. Nothing in its presentation suggested what it would unleash. The reading began with clauses that sounded familiar: bequests to colleagues, small sums to acquaintances, odd choices, perhaps, but still recognizable as the decisions of a wealthy bachelor with no heirs. Miller had left shares in a brewery to ministers who publicly opposed alcohol. He left a vacation property in Jamaica to 3 men who openly disliked one another, with instructions that they share it together. Some in the room smiled, others shook their heads. It felt like eccentricity, even humor. But the lawyers did not rush. They moved slowly, because they knew what came next. When the reader reached the final portion of the will, his voice changed, not in volume, but in pace. The sentence was longer than the others, more deliberate. It did not distribute money immediately. It postponed it. The clause instructed that the remaining assets of the estate were to be converted to cash 10 years after Miller's death. That detail alone caused confusion. Why wait 10 years? Why delay distribution? Then came the condition. The money was to be awarded to the mother who, since the date of Miller's death, had given birth in Toronto to the greatest number of children. The words were clear. There was no metaphor, no symbolism, just a requirement. If more than one woman qualified, the estate would be divided equally. The lawyer stopped reading, not because the clause was unclear, but because the room needed time to absorb it. Someone laughed. It was short, uncomfortable. Another voice asked if it was real. A third asked if it could be challenged. The lawyer did not answer immediately, because at that moment no one knew. The clause did not violate an obvious statute. It did not instruct anyone to commit a crime. It did not force participation. It simply promised money later to whoever met the condition, and that distinction mattered. As people left the room, reactions split quickly. Some dismissed it as a prank. Others called it offensive. A few recognized something else entirely, that the will did not require planning in advance. It required only response. Any woman in Toronto could qualify. No registration, no entry form, no announcement, just time. 10 years. The newspapers moved fast. Within days, the clause was printed in full. Commentary followed immediately. Editorials condemned the idea as irresponsible. Religious leaders warned against temptation. Politicians questioned whether the courts should intervene. But the will had already done its work. It had introduced a new variable into daily life, a future incentive, one that could not be ignored once understood. In households across the city, the conversation began cautiously. Could this be real? Would it hold up in court? Would anyone actually try? For some families, the question was theoretical. For others, it was practical. Toronto was growing rapidly, but stability was uneven. Jobs were uncertain, housing was crowded, relief systems were limited. Children already arrived in close succession for many families, not by strategy, but by circumstance. Miller's clause did not create fertility. It reframed it. And as the months passed, one fact became unavoidable. The will did not care why children were born. It only counted them. That realization marked the moment when curiosity shifted into calculation, and the Great Stork Derby, though not yet named, quietly began. At first, the city treated the will like a curiosity, a strange footnote in the life of a wealthy man, something to read about over breakfast, something to laugh at, then set aside. But Toronto did not set it aside. Within days, newspapers across the city printed the clause in full, word for word. Not summarized, not softened. Readers were invited to judge it for themselves. Editorial columns filled quickly. Some writers dismissed the will as irresponsible. Others framed it as satire. A few suggested Miller was mocking society's obsession with morality while quietly benefiting from inequality. But the strongest reactions came from pulpits and public offices. Church leaders warned that the clause encouraged recklessness, that it reduced children to numbers, that it placed women under pressure that could not be justified by money. Politicians echoed those concerns, calling for legal intervention. Yet none of those voices could answer the same question everyone else was asking. Could it actually work? Because outrage does not stop arithmetic, and arithmetic was at the heart of the clause. The will did not require anyone to act differently than they already did. It did not demand contracts. It did not demand consent forms. It simply promised that if, after 10 years, one woman had given birth more times than the others, she would inherit. The city slowly realized that the will was not directing behavior. It was waiting to observe it. As the weeks passed, the language surrounding the clause changed. Newspapers stopped calling it eccentric. They began calling it a contest, a race. And soon a name appeared in headlines: the Great Stork Derby. The phrase spread quickly. It appeared in political cartoons, in gossip columns, in casual conversation. At first, it was used jokingly, but jokes lose their humor when money enters the room. And money, serious money, was exactly what was at stake. Toronto was not wealthy as a whole. Many families lived one missed paycheck away from crisis. Tenements were crowded. Rent rose faster than wages. Medical care was limited and expensive. For families already struggling, the will represented something dangerous. Not hope exactly, but possibility. A chance that did not require education, connections, or influence, only endurance. And once that possibility entered the public imagination, it could not be removed. Some families dismissed it immediately. They trusted the courts would overturn it. Others believed the government would intervene. But some did neither. They paid attention. They followed birth announcements. They read carefully when newspapers reported on growing families. They noticed when reporters began tracking pregnancies. Because slowly, quietly, something shifted. Pregnancy stopped being private. It became observable, speculated upon, counted. Women noticed glances they had never noticed before. Shopkeepers commented, neighbors whispered, strangers asked questions that once would have been unthinkable. How many now? Still trying? Do you think it'll hold up? The city had turned biology into public interest, and not everyone was comfortable with that. Medical professionals raised concerns about maternal health. Social workers warned that children would be born into instability. But those warnings competed with something louder: survival. The will did not promise comfort, it promised relief. And as the decade progressed toward the early 1930s, relief became harder to find. When the Great Depression arrived, it did not create desperation in Toronto, it revealed it. Factories closed, jobs vanished, relief lines lengthened, and in homes already crowded with children, the derby stopped being hypothetical. It became something families calculated late at night in quiet conversations after the children were asleep. Not everyone decided to enter, but some did. And once that line was crossed, there was no turning back, because the Great Stork Derby did not reward partial effort. It rewarded persistence. And from that point forward, the city was no longer watching an idea, it was watching people. The Great Stork Derby did not begin with an announcement. There was no starting signal, no enrollment, no official list. It began quietly in homes where decisions were already shaped by necessity. Some of the women who would later be identified as contenders never intended to enter anything at all. They were already mothers, already struggling, already accustomed to making do with less. In neighborhoods where families lived close together, sometimes in single rooms, children arrived quickly, one after another, without the spacing doctors recommended but few could afford. For these women, the Derby did not feel like a choice. It felt like recognition, a strange acknowledgement that the lives they were already living might, for once, be valued. Among them was Lucy Alice Timlick. She lived with her husband and children in modest conditions, relying at times on public relief. Winters were harsh, fuel was expensive. During the coldest months, the family slept together in one room to conserve heat. Lucy was not a public figure. She did not give interviews willingly, but her growing family caught attention anyway. Then there was Kathleen Ellen Nagel, whose household was equally strained. Employment for her husband was inconsistent. Money came and went. Like many women at the time, Kathleen managed the household with careful discipline, stretching food, repairing clothes, managing illness without access to regular medical care. Her pregnancies were not discussed as ambition, they were discussed as burden. Yet as the years passed, neighbors noticed patterns. Births were counted, announcements were clipped from newspapers, and what had once been private milestones became data points. Annie Catherine Smith lived with similar uncertainty. Her husband worked as a firefighter, a steady position by comparison, but wages were modest, and large families brought constant pressure. Before the will, 9 children would have been seen as hardship. After the will, 9 children became something else, not advantage, but eligibility. Isabel Mary McLean was in a comparable position. Her family was large, her resources limited. Her pregnancies were physically demanding. Recovery time was minimal. Like the others, she did not live with confidence that the future would improve on its own. None of these women advertised their intentions. None of them declared themselves competitors. But slowly, unmistakably, they became known, not as mothers, as entries. The newspapers played a role. At first, coverage was cautious. Birth notices were factual. But as readership increased, tone shifted. Reporters began following families. Questions became more direct. How many children now? Was another expected? Did the family believe the will would hold up? Photographs appeared. Children lined up for the camera. Mothers stood behind them, tired expressions carefully neutral. Consent was rarely discussed. Public curiosity did not ask permission. The women felt it immediately. Strangers commented in public spaces. Shopkeepers asked questions that once would have been inappropriate. Doctors discussed pregnancies as statistics. The city, consciously or not, had begun measuring worth by count. And once the numbers mattered, pressure followed. Some women felt compelled to continue even when their bodies resisted. Medical advice was often ignored, not out of recklessness, but out of calculation. Stopping early meant falling behind. Falling behind meant forfeiting a future that had already been imagined. Not imagined as luxury, imagined as stability. As years passed, the emotional strain deepened. Pregnancies overlapped. Recovery blurred into preparation. Loss became part of the process. Miscarriages were mourned privately, but recorded publicly. Stillbirths raised questions no one wanted to answer. Did they count? Should they count? The will had not clarified, and in that silence, uncertainty grew. Some women withdrew quietly, unable or unwilling to continue. Others pressed forward, not because they believed victory was guaranteed, but because stopping felt worse. The Great Stork Derby did not require cruelty. It produced it indirectly, through attention, through silence, through expectation. By the early 1930s, the race had names, faces, histories, and Toronto was no longer observing an inheritance clause. It was watching lives shaped by it, day by day, birth by birth. By the early 1930s, the Great Stork Derby was no longer an idea, it was a pattern. Newspapers no longer asked whether the will would matter, they asked who was ahead. Birth announcements were grouped together, tallies appeared beside names. What had once been family news became a scoreboard. And with that shift, the tone of the city changed. Some families began to follow the numbers closely. They noticed which names appeared repeatedly in print. They noticed when a household moved ahead or fell behind. The Derby created a quiet awareness that was impossible to escape. Every pregnancy was observed. Every delivery was noted. And in a city already under economic strain, attention itself became pressure. Reporters visited homes uninvited. They asked questions that would once have been unthinkable. How many children now? Are you expecting again? Do you think you can win? Some women refused to answer. Others learned that silence did not stop speculation. Photographs appeared regardless. Images of children standing in rows, their ages listed beneath them. Articles described families in numerical terms: 7 children, 8 children, 9 children. The language shifted, not her family, but her count. And with that shift came rivalry, not always open, often unspoken, but present. Women became aware of one another through print. They learned names they had never met. They compared progress, not because they wanted to compete with each other, but because the system had made comparison unavoidable. The pressure extended beyond the home. Medical professionals were drawn into the conversation. Some warned openly that repeated pregnancies without recovery increased risk. Others quietly recorded outcomes, aware their records might later be scrutinized in court. Health became a legal question. So did legitimacy. Questions emerged that had no easy answers. Did a stillborn child count? What about infants who died shortly after birth? What about children born outside marriage? The will had not specified, and that silence would later carry enormous weight. Public opinion split. Some commentators blamed the women for participating. Others blamed Millar for creating the condition. Very few blamed the system that turned desperation into arithmetic. The Great Depression deepened. Work disappeared. Relief lines grew longer. For families already struggling, the Derby became a symbol of possibility that could not be abandoned lightly. Stopping meant accepting the present as permanent. Continuing meant enduring more. The years passed unevenly. Some families surged ahead, others stalled. Some withdrew quietly, overwhelmed by loss or illness. And as the final years approached, it became clear that the race would not resolve itself cleanly. Too many lives had intersected with the clause. Too many births had occurred under its shadow. The closer the deadline came, the heavier the atmosphere became, because everyone understood what was coming next. If the will stood, the courts would have to decide what counted, and deciding what counted meant deciding whose suffering mattered. As the final years of the Great Stork Derby approached, the numbers began to settle, not because the race was slowing, but because reality was asserting itself. By the mid-1930s, Toronto's hospitals and clinics had seen patterns emerge. The same names appeared repeatedly in birth records. The same families returned again and again. And alongside those records were others, less visible, less discussed. Records of loss. Miscarriages were common. Stillbirths were not rare. Medical care for working-class women was limited, and repeated pregnancies carried cumulative risk. Doctors knew this. Midwives knew this. The women knew it most of all. Yet the will did not acknowledge recovery. It did not account for exhaustion. It counted outcomes. One of the most discussed cases was Lillian Kenny. By the time the deadline approached, she had given birth more times than any other woman in the Derby. Newspapers followed her closely. Her name appeared often. She was described as determined, resilient, unstoppable. But behind the headlines was a quieter reality. Several of her children were stillborn. Others died shortly after birth. The losses were not speculative. They were documented. And as the deadline approached, a question emerged that would alter everything. Did those children count? The will did not say, but the courts would have to. Another woman, Pauline May Clark, faced a different problem. She too had reached 10 births within the 10-year period, but several of her children were born outside marriage. At the time, legitimacy mattered, not socially alone, but legally. Birth records marked status, and status carried consequences. Then there was Grace Begnato. By some counts, she had more surviving children than anyone else. She had given birth multiple times. She was respected in her community, known for intelligence and generosity. But her residency status was questioned, and with that, her eligibility came under review. Each case revealed the same truth. The Derby was no longer about effort, it was about interpretation. Families began to realize that endurance alone would not determine the outcome, the courts would. And courts required definitions, cold ones. Public sympathy shifted uneasily. Some readers argued that stillbirths should count. Others argued the will never intended them to. Some felt legitimacy rules were unjust. Others insisted the law could not ignore them. What had once been framed as a race now resembled a trial, one without a jury and with no clear standard of fairness. For the women involved, this uncertainty was devastating. Loss had already taken enough. Now it risked being dismissed entirely. The approaching deadline, October 31, 1936, hung over the city like an unanswered question. Families waited, lawyers prepared, judges reviewed precedents that had never been meant for this situation. And as the final months passed, it became clear that the greatest struggle of the Great Stork Derby would not be between families, it would be between life as lived and life as defined on paper. By the time the Great Stork Derby reached the courtroom, it was no longer a curiosity. It was a legal problem with no precedent. The estate of Charles Vance Miller had grown steadily during the 10-year waiting period. Investments matured, assets appreciated. What had once seemed like an eccentric sum had become substantial, and now everyone wanted clarity. The first challenges came early. Distant relatives, people who had never been part of Miller's life, appeared suddenly, arguing that the will was unreasonable and should be overturned. The province of Ontario attempted to intervene, suggesting the funds should be redirected to public use. Religious organizations submitted opinions. Medical professionals raised concerns. But at the center of every argument was the same question. Could a will legally condition inheritance on childbirth? Lower courts struggled. Some judges expressed discomfort but found no clear violation of law. Others argued the clause was against public policy. But public policy, like morality, was difficult to define precisely. Miller had not forced anyone to participate. He had not promised payment in advance. He had not violated existing statutes. He had written a condition, and conditions were legal. As appeals moved upward, the legal debate narrowed. This was no longer about whether the clause was wise, it was about whether it was valid. In 1937, the case reached the Supreme Court of Canada. The justices reviewed the will line by line. They examined intent. They examined language. They examined the structure of the clause, written by a lawyer who knew exactly how challenges would be framed. Miller had anticipated objections.
He had specified time frames. He had clarified location. He had addressed ties. He had done what many wills failed to do. He had been precise. The court acknowledged the discomfort surrounding the case, but discomfort was not illegality. The ruling was decisive. The will would stand. The Great Stork Derby Clause was upheld. The money would be distributed according to the terms Miller had written. But the ruling did not resolve everything. In fact, it created a new problem. If the will was valid, the court now had to decide how to interpret it. And interpretation required judgment. Judgment required exclusion. The courts had to determine what constituted a birth, what constituted a child, what constituted eligibility. Stillbirths were examined. Illegitimacy was debated. Residency was scrutinized. Birth certificates became legal exhibits. Medical records were summoned. The courtroom filled with documents that told partial stories. Stories reduced to dates, signatures, and official stamps. For the women involved, this phase was often more painful than the pregnancies themselves, because now their lives were being discussed without them present. Their losses were being weighed. Their efforts were being categorized. Some women testified, others did not. Lawyers spoke on their behalf, and slowly, quietly, the list of contenders shrank. Not because fewer had endured, but because fewer qualified. By the time the legal arguments concluded, the race no longer belonged to the public. It belonged to the court, and the court was preparing to deliver a verdict that would redefine what the Great Stork Derby had been all along.
By the autumn of 1936, the Great Stork Derby was no longer debated in theory. It had reached its end. On October 31, exactly 10 years after Charles Vance Miller collapsed at his desk and died, the window closed. No more births would count. No exceptions would be granted. What followed was not celebration, it was waiting. Birth records from hospitals across Toronto were gathered and reviewed. Civil registries were examined line by line. Dates, locations, parentage, everything mattered. The process was slow, painfully slow, because every entry represented a life event that had once been personal, private, and deeply human. Now it was evidence. Court officials compiled tallies, lawyers recalculated, families followed rumors closely, trying to understand where they stood without access to official information. Some believed they were ahead, others feared they had already fallen behind. Very few were confident. The press sensed the tension immediately. Newspapers published timelines, speculation columns reappeared. Headlines asked who would win, as if the outcome were already determined. But it wasn't, because even at this stage, uncertainty ruled. Some women had births that were disputed. Others had children born near the boundary of the deadline. Minutes mattered. So did documentation. In several cases, the timing of labor, registration delays, and hospital procedures became decisive. Behind closed doors, judges and legal clerks debated interpretation. They reviewed precedents that had never been intended for this kind of question. They weighed literal language against lived reality. The will did not mention intent. It did not consider hardship. It required a count, and that count had to be defensible. As legal review continued, the public learned fragments. Names appeared and disappeared from unofficial lists. Some women were quietly informed they were no longer eligible. Others learned they were still under consideration. No announcements were made. No confirmations issued. The silence was deliberate, because once the list was finalized, there would be no room for revision. The estate itself had grown significantly during the decade. Miller's investments had continued to mature. What had once been described as a large inheritance was now undeniably substantial, enough to change lives, enough to justify every moment of attention it had received.
As days turned into weeks, the strain became visible. Some families stopped speaking to reporters. Others waited anxiously for letters that did not arrive. The city felt suspended, not in excitement, in uncertainty. Everyone knew the decision would not satisfy everyone. No matter how the verdict fell, it would leave questions unanswered. What mattered most now was not who had given birth the most, it was who the court would recognize as having done so. The Great Stork Derby, which had begun as a condition written quietly into a will, had reached its final phase, not in a hospital, not in a home, but in a courtroom. And soon, one name, or several, would be spoken aloud, ending the wait and redefining everything that had come before. The courtroom was quiet when the decision was finally delivered. Not the uneasy quiet of uncertainty, but the restrained stillness of people who understood that whatever came next could not be undone. The legal process had taken years. Arguments had been filed, appeals exhausted, records examined and re-examined. Now there was nothing left to debate. Judge William Edward Middleton took his seat. He was not an outsider to large families. He himself had grown up as one of 9 children. But personal experience did not guide the law. The courtroom clerk called the case the Millionaire estate. No speeches were given, no commentary allowed. The judge began by restating the central fact. The will of Charles Vance Millionaire was valid. That question had already been settled. What remained was interpretation. Middleton addressed the clause directly. The words "given birth" were not ambiguous, he said, but they required definition. A birth under the law required a child born alive. Stillbirths, while real losses, could not be counted. The courtroom remained still. Next, he addressed legitimacy. The law, as it stood during the period in question, required that births be legally recognized. Children born outside marriage, regardless of circumstance, did not meet that requirement. No justification was offered, only precedent. Then came residency. The will specified Toronto, not surrounding districts, not adjacent municipalities, Toronto. Eligibility depended on compliance with that boundary. Each ruling narrowed the field. Names fell away, not spoken aloud, but understood. What had once seemed like a race now resembled a process of elimination. When the judge reached the final tally, he paused, not for effect, but because accuracy mattered. He read the names slowly. Annie Catherine Smith, Kathleen Ellen Nagel, Lucy Alice Timlick, Isabel Mary McLean. Each woman, the court determined, had given birth to 9 children within the 10-year period, all of whom met the legal requirements set forth in the will. No one had exceeded that number under qualifying conditions. There was a tie. The estate would be divided equally among them. The verdict was final. No cheers followed, no celebration, just a collective recognition that something long anticipated had finally arrived. For the women named, the decision carried weight that extended beyond the money. It validated endurance, but not without cost. After legal fees, court expenses, and administrative costs were deducted, each woman received approximately $110,000, enough to change their circumstances, not enough to erase what had already been endured. Other women received nothing. Some later accepted settlements. Others walked away entirely. Grace Bagnato, who many believed should have prevailed, chose not to pursue compensation. She never spoke publicly about the Derby again. The courtroom emptied slowly. There was no sense of victory in the air, only resolution. The Great Stork Derby had ended, not with a winner, but with a judgment. And in that judgment, Charles Vance Millar's final condition had been fulfilled, not as he might have imagined, but exactly as he had written it. When the courtroom emptied, the story did not end. It simply moved out of public view. The money was distributed slowly over time after legal costs and fees were deducted. There were no ceremonies, no public acknowledgments, just checks issued, deposits made, and lives quietly altered. For Annie Catherine Smith, the inheritance arrived when her family had almost nothing. Her husband had steady work, but the household was stretched thin. The money allowed them to buy property, invest carefully, and create stability where there had been none. For Kathleen Ellen Nagel, relief came during a period of deep uncertainty. The funds provided housing and security, not excess. Her family lived more comfortably, but not extravagantly. Lucy Alice Timlick had been living on government relief just days before the payment arrived. Her family had endured winters sleeping together in a single room to stay warm. With the money, they purchased a home and invested cautiously. She later remarked that what surprised her most was not the inheritance itself, but how quickly strangers appeared once it arrived. Isabel Mary McLean invested her share conservatively. Her family's financial position improved gradually rather than suddenly. The money did not transform her life overnight, but it altered the path forward. Other women received far less. Lillian Kenny and Pauline May Clark pursued legal settlements and were eventually compensated in smaller amounts. Neither retained long-term wealth from the Derby. Grace Bagnato, despite having one of the largest families and strong public sympathy, accepted nothing. She returned to private life and never spoke publicly about the contest again. Her family later recalled that the subject was avoided entirely. The children, the true legacy of the Derby, grew up largely outside the spotlight. Some families prospered modestly, others returned to hardship. There was no uniform outcome. The Great Stork Derby did not produce a single narrative, it produced many. And Charles Vance Millar never clarified his intention. Some believed he was challenging religious authority, others believed he was criticizing social hypocrisy. Still others believed he was simply testing the law. What is certain is this: he understood incentives. He understood how people respond when survival meets opportunity. And he understood that the law, when followed precisely, does not weigh suffering, it measures compliance. The Great Stork Derby forced a city to confront uncomfortable truths about poverty, about motherhood, about how easily private lives become public under pressure. It showed how rules, once written, can outlive the people they affect. And it left behind a question that has never fully settled. Was the inheritance a reward or a mirror? Because in the end, the money did not follow virtue, it followed the wording. And the cost of that precision was paid not in courtrooms, but in homes, hospitals, and lives that continued long after the verdict was delivered.
The verdict is in. Subscribe for more true inheritance stories.